purpose of a purpose. Let me tell you a story. It's February 2003. Now, I know this because I was sitting in my brand new Honda Odyssey van that I'd purchased. And it had the new car smell and everything. But I was sitting there alone in a empty state park parking lot. Everybody at work thought I was out trying to sell something. My wife thought I was at work, and I spent the entire day sitting in that van, most of the time crying, absolutely miserable. Now, I had no reason to be miserable. I just paid cash for the van. I was a partner in a business, and I lived in a house I and Susie had just built, and I had 3 wonderful children that between the ages of 12 and 2, and I was married to a drop-dead gorgeous blonde who I'd been in love with since she was 16. I had no reason to be miserable, but there I was all day, absolutely miserable. Well, evening comes, and it's time for me to go home, and I don't want to worry my wife, so I pull myself together and I go home and pretend that nothing's wrong. And that night, everybody else goes to bed, and there I am sitting in my dark living room, again, absolutely miserable. And I sat there for a while. Now, maybe not all that long. I'd struggled with depression most of my life, and I knew what this was about, but I just didn't know how much longer this could go on. And I finally thought about it, and I just came to this overwhelming realization that I had to figure out what was the difference between surviving and thriving. And I had to do it because my employees deserved a better boss than me. My business partner deserved a much better business partner than me. Um, my children deserved a much better example of how to live than I was living. And my wife deserved a much better husband than me. And I determined at that moment that one way or another I was going to figure out what was the difference between surviving and thriving. And in that moment, I didn't know it till years and years and years later, but in that moment, that's the part that made all the difference. Not the deciding to figure out what was the difference between surviving and thriving, but doing so for someone's sake other than my own. You see, in that moment, I became what Donald Miller called in a great book you should definitely read, called Hero on a Mission. And that sounds arrogant, but when you think about it, it's not. Okay, a mission is just something important someone does that has a real goal. And it's important enough to make risk and take chances to do it. And a hero is someone who does something for someone else's sake, someone other than themselves. And I had been trying to figure out what made life wonderful for years, but I was doing it because I wanted a great life. And suddenly, the same quest became entirely different when it was for someone else. And in that is why purpose matters. It is what makes all the difference in the world. We are designed to live a life that is greater than ourselves. And if our end goal is to benefit ourselves, that is paradoxically impossible for it to be greater than ourselves. No, when in our hearts we determine to do something important, a life quest, a life mission that is for someone else's sake, everything else, everything about us takes on a different meaning. And that is the purpose of a purpose. It is. When you live a life with a purpose, your life still is a mess. It still has ups and downs and successes and failures and friends and people who can't stand you. It has all those things. It is full of those things, but that is the point. It is full. It is full. And it is fulfilling because you're doing something. You're making a difference for someone other than yourself. And I know for many of you right now, you're listening to this voice and you're saying, oh, that's bullcrap. Or the voice is more importantly saying, it's the voice of a critic saying, yeah, you've tried that. It didn't work. You're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to actually be able to make a difference for anybody other than yourself. It's this critic. And that critic, for most of us, is a person sitting on our shoulder, and that person's whispering in our ear, or maybe shouting, and they are sounding just like us, and they look like us, because it is us. Well, Teddy Roosevelt had the answer for the critic, and I'm going to share that with you now. It is such a wonderful speech, and it is the speech that Arena Success Group is named after. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. No. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly and errs and comes short again and again, for there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who actually strives to do the deeds, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, and who, in the end, if he succeeds, knows the triumph of high achievement. But if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, and his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat.